He thought marrying her was a solution to all his problems, but what he found hidden in her diary would change his life forever. The rain fell in steady sheets over quiet streets of Ashford, a small city where ambition often collided with reality. Ethan Miller trudged along the sidewalk, his worn backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, the hem of his jacket soaked through. At 24, he was chasing dreams that always seemed just out of reach. Painting commissions that never paid enough, gallery openings that didn't call back, and debts that pile higher than his apartment's sagging ceiling. His phone buzzed, vibrating insistently in his pocket. Not another bill, he muttered to himself. He fished it out, expecting another reminder from the bank, maybe another email from a frustrated client. Instead, the screen displayed an unfamiliar name, Margaret Langley. Ethan Miller, this is Margaret Langley. I'd like to meet with you. It's important, said a calm, composed voice. The voice was smooth, measured, and carried a weight that made Ethan pause in the middle of the sidewalk. He had never heard of this woman, and yet something in the way she spoke demanded attention. I'm sorry, who is this? How do you know me? Ethan asked, hesitant. That doesn't matter. What matters is the opportunity I'm offering. Meet me at Langley Manor this evening at 7. It's urgent, she replied, her tone cool, deliberate. Before he could protest, the call ended. Ethan stared at his phone, a mixture of confusion and unease twisting in his chest. A wealthy stranger requesting a meeting at a mansion? Something about it set his instincts on edge, but curiosity, coupled with the gnawing weight of his debts, made him consider going. By evening, the rain had thickened, soaking the bone as he walked up the long driveway of Langley Manor. The mansion loomed above him, its stone facade massive and imposing, bathed in the glow of golden lights that did little to soften its grandeur. Every step on the gravel path echoed against the silence of the estate, amplifying Ethan's nerves. Inside, warmth and the subtle scent of jasmine filled the air, a stark contrast to the chill outside. At the center of the grand foyer, Margaret Langley awaited, a striking woman in her mid-60s, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her tailored suit speaking of decades of refinement and wealth. She gestured gracefully toward a seating area. Ethan, please sit, she said calm with a faint smile. Ethan hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Something in her eyes, sharp, unwavering, made it impossible to look away. Mrs. Langley, you said this was important. What is this about? He asked carefully. I know about your debts, Ethan, the ones that have been following you for years. I also know about your struggles, the work you do, and the sacrifices you've made for your family. You fought hard, but life hasn't been fair. I want to help, she said, her voice steady. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. The fire of her gaze was tempered by something almost tender, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, a calculated certainty. Help, how exactly? Ethan asked, confusion tightening his chest. I will pay off every debt you have. Every loan, every bill, every unpaid commission. I will ensure your future is secure. But in return, her voice dropped slightly, deliberate, almost chilling in its precision. You will become my husband. Ethan blinked, certain he had misheard. You want me to marry you? Just like that? He asked nervously, a laugh of disbelief escaping his lips. Yes, this is not about romance, not about love. It's an arrangement. You gain financial freedom. I gain companionship and someone to carry my name. That is all, she said, unwavering. Ethan's mind raced. Pride, fear, desperation. They collided in a storm that rivaled the one outside. He thought of his overdue rent, his mother's mounting medical bills, the endless letters from creditors. Could he really say no? Could he accept such a proposal without losing himself completely? This is insane. Why me? He whispered, his voice trembling. Because you are young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider it. And I do not need love. I need someone who will secure my legacy while respecting my rules. Think of it as a contract, Ethan. Nothing more, nothing less, she replied, leaning slightly closer, her eyes never leaving his. The storm outside pressed against the windows like a mirror of the turmoil in Ethan's chest. For the first time in weeks, he felt the possibility of relief from the crushing weight of his debts. And yet, The price was far greater than he could have imagined. The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of Margaret's words. The mansion seemed even larger in the pale morning light, its towering windows reflecting his unease back at him. Every polished surface, every ornate sculpture reminded him that he had crossed a threshold he might never return from. He found Margaret in the library, sipping her morning tea with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside him. "You've decided, haven't you?" she asked without looking up from her cup. Ethan hesitated, staring at the intricate patterns on the rug. He thought of his mother, struggling to keep up with the medical bills, and the small apartment that had never felt like a home. After a long pause, he nodded. I'll do it," he said quietly, his voice carrying a mix of resignation and uncertainty. Margaret set down her cup, her piercing eyes studying him for a moment before a faint smile curved her lips. "Good. The arrangements will be made immediately." The week that followed passed in a blur. There were meetings with lawyers, notarized documents, and whispered instructions from Margaret's staff. The grandeur of the mansion, once intimidating, began to feel suffocating, as though the walls themselves were watching him. Finally, the day arrived. Ethan stood in a small courthouse, his hands clammy despite the crisp suit Margaret had provided. The ceremony was quiet, almost clinical, witnessed only by a notary and Margaret's lawyer. Ethan felt the weight of every eye upon him, even though the room was nearly empty. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a cold shiver ran down his spine. He looked at Margaret, who offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to your new life, Ethan Miller," she said, her voice smooth and formal. The drive back to the mansion was silent. Rain had returned, drizzling lightly, and Ethan found himself staring out the window at the reflection of the streetlights in the wet pavement. In the puddles, he saw not just his own face, but the shadow of the choices he had made, the cost he had agreed to bear. Stepping into the mansion, he felt the vastness of it pressing down on him. Every hallway, every staircase, seemed endless. The house was impeccably clean, yet cold. The walls, adorned with priceless paintings and antique mirrors, seemed almost a whisper that he was a visitor in someone else's world, a gilded cage from which there was no easy escape. Margaret greeted him in the foyer, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction. Dinner is at 7, she said, the formal address sending a shiver down his spine. Ethan nodded, mutely following a housekeeper who led him to his room. It was luxurious beyond anything he had imagined. A king-size bed, antique furnishings, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens. Yet, despite the opulence, the room felt cold, untouched by warmth or human presence. That evening, he joined Margaret for dinner in the vast dining room. She sat at the head of the long table, immaculate in a silk blouse and pearls, while Ethan took a seat at the other end, feeling dwarfed by the room and the woman who had orchestrated this new chapter of his life. "I trust you are settling in?" Margaret asked, her voice calm, precise, slicing through the silence. "It's different," Ethan replied cautiously. "This place is huge. Feels like I could get lost." Margaret smirked slightly, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "You'll get used to it, or you won't. Either way, you're here." Ethan swallowed, discomfort rising at her bluntness. He hesitated before asking, "You didn't mention much about your late husband?" Margaret's knife paused mid-cut, and she dabbed her mouth with her napkin before speaking. "He was a businessman, like your father. Their paths crossed once or twice, but as you might imagine, not all encounters end well." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Margaret's eyes sharpened. "Let's just say unfinished business has a way of lingering, but that's in the past. Soon you'll understand why I chose you." The cryptic words left Ethan uneasy, the unease settling deep his chest as they finished dinner in silence. He wandered the halls afterward, exploring the mansion that was now both his home and his prison. The staff moved silently, avoiding his gaze. Locked doors loomed around every corner, brass handles gleaming in the dim light. Every shadow seemed to whisper secrets he wasn't meant to know. As he lay in his vast, opulent bed that night, Ethan stared at the ceiling, thinking of the life he had left behind, the debts he had escaped, and the bargain he had struck. The mansion, the wealth, the escape from financial ruin. It all came at a cost far greater than he could have imagined. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered if he had truly gained freedom or merely stepped into another kind of trap. Ethan's first week in the mansion passed in a strange haze. The grandeur that had once impressed him now felt oppressive. Every corridor and hallway stretching endlessly, as if the house itself were aware of his presence and judging him. The staff moved with quiet precision, eyes downcast, whispering to one another in tones he could barely catch. He began to notice patterns. The way they paused when he entered a room, the subtle exchange of glances when he passed, as if the mansion held secrets he wasn't meant to uncover. One evening, while exploring the upper floors, he noticed doors that were locked, their brass handles gleaming faintly in the dim light. Each one seemed to mock him, whispering secrets he couldn't touch. He ran his fingers over the cold metal, a chill creeping up his spine. "Why are these rooms locked?" he asked quietly to a passing housekeeper, a frail woman whose face was lined with years of silent service. The woman looked at him briefly, eyes flickering with caution, and then muttered, "You shouldn't concern yourself with things that don't belong to you, sir." Ethan's stomach tightened. Something in her tone warned him that this mansion held more than wealth. It held traps, carefully hidden and meticulously maintained. Late that night, the mansion was eerily silent. Ethan wandered the halls, the polished floors creaking beneath his steps. The shadows stretched unnaturally, flickering in the soft glow of the hallway lights. He could feel the weight of the house pressing down on him, as though the walls themselves were watching, waiting. In the library, he overheard snippets of conversations from the staff, words that made his stomach twist. "Why him?" one whispered. "Does he even know what he's involved in?" Another replied. "She never does anything without a reason," the first voice said. "He'll figure it out eventually. They always do." Ethan froze, every nerve in his body on high alert. The words weren't meant for him, but they had reached him nonetheless. He backed away slowly, heart hammering. Days later, while Margaret was away at a charity event, Ethan found himself in her study, his curiosity impossible to quell. Papers were strewn across the desk, organized chaos hiding layers of secrets. Among them lay a small, ornate key, its surface intricate and cold. It caught the dim light, gleaming almost as if it were waiting for him. His heart pounded as he glanced around the empty room, making sure he was alone. The weight of the key in his hand was heavier than he expected, a tangible symbol of the mysteries surrounding Margaret. Could this key unlock one of the locked doors he had noticed? Could it reveal what he had sensed but couldn't yet name? That night, lying in his luxurious but suffocating room, Ethan turned the key over in his hands, tracing the delicate patterns carved into its surface. Questions swirled in his mind, questions that offered no answers. What exactly had he married into? Why had Margaret truly chosen him? And what secrets did the mansion guard so fiercely? Sleep came fitfully. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow moving across the walls, made him startle. He thought of the staff's whispered warnings, the locked doors, and the key that now rested on his nightstand like a cold promise. Something was not right. Something was being hidden from him. By the end of the week, Ethan realized that the mansion, for all its opulence and comfort, was a gilded cage. Margaret Langley's carefully controlled world was one he'd been invited into, yet every corridor, every door, every glance reminded him that he was merely a pawn in a game far larger than he understood. And deep inside, Ethan knew one thing with certainty. He couldn't simply follow the rules she had laid out. He needed to find the truth. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was holding its breath, as though it too waited for him to discover something he wasn't meant to see. The key he had taken from Margaret's study burned against his palm, a cold weight that demanded action. He spent the day pretending to busy himself with the vast, empty halls, all the while planning his next move. That night, with Margaret at gala across town, he crept toward the locked door he had noticed weeks ago, its brass handle gleaming faintly in the soft glow of the hallway lights. Every step toward it felt like trespassing into forbidden territory, yet he couldn't turn back. His instincts screamed at him. Something vital, something dangerous, was hidden behind that door. Hands trembling slightly, Ethan slipped the ornate key into the lock. The soft click reverberated through the silent hallway. echoing against the walls and making him jump. Slowly, he pushed the door open. What lay beyond was a room frozen in time, as though Margaret had stepped out decades ago and left the world untouched. Dust motes floated lazily in the moonlight streaming through tall windows. Faded wallpaper curled at the corners, and antique furniture was draped in white sheets. But it wasn't the room itself that caught Ethan's attention. It was the desk and the leather-bound diary that lay atop it. The cover was worn, soft with age, and the pages inside held the weight of secrets. He hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. Could this be dangerous? Could this discovery change everything? Ethan barely slept that night. The diary lay on his nightstand, open to pages filled with Margaret's meticulous accounts, her manipulations, and her unrelenting plans. Every sentence clawed at him, a stark reminder how carefully he'd been drawn into her world. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, each more urgent than the last. How long had she been planning this? How many of the mansion's secrets had been carefully hidden from him? And most importantly, what could he do about it? By morning, the weight of indecision became unbearable. He knew he couldn't ignore what he had found. Margaret's arrangements, the contracts, the letters connecting his family's past to her grievances. It all painted a picture far darker than a simple business arrangement. This was no ordinary marriage. It was a trap. Ethan needed guidance, someone who could look at the evidence objectively. He reached out to Liam, a trusted friend from law school, explaining that he might have stumbled upon something serious. Under the guise of a routine catch-up, they met at a quiet cafe downtown. I think there's more to her than I realized, Ethan said, voice low, eyes darting around the empty tables. It's not just money. She's planning something calculated. Liam leaned back, studying him. Show me. Ethan handed over the diary, the letters, and the notes he had managed to copy. Liam's eyes widened as he skimmed through them, flipping pages with careful hands. This is serious, Liam whispered. If any of this is true, she's been orchestrating everything to manipulate you, and possibly to cover her tracks in ways that are illegal. Fraud, coercion, falsified documents. This could be a criminal case. Ethan felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear because he was now caught in something far bigger than he had imagined, but relief because he finally had a path forward. So what do we do? He asked, voice tight. Liam looked at him with measured calm. We document everything. Copies, timestamps, evidence. And then you take it to the authorities. Carefully. She's clever. She'll notice any misstep. But this is the only way to protect yourself. Over the next few days, Ethan became meticulous. He made copies of the diary, photographed the letters, and kept detailed records of every interaction, every contract, and every suspicious document he discovered in the mansion. The risk was high, but the longer he delayed, the more danger he would be in. He also began observing Margaret more closely, noting patterns and routines. Every time she spoke, there was a precision in her words, a way of framing reality that reinforced her control. But now, armed with knowledge, Ethan could see the cracks beneath the surface. The meticulous planning, the obsession with control, and the unrelenting need to dominate outcomes that weren't hers to command. Late one evening, while Margaret was attending another high-profile charity event, Ethan quietly reviewed the evidence one final time. His hands trembled slightly, but his resolve was firm. He understood now that this was bigger than personal betrayal. This was about justice. For himself, for the people she had manipulated, and for the truths buried in the shadows of the past. And with that realization, he made his decision. He would no longer be a pawn in her game. He would expose the truth, no matter how carefully she had tried to hide it. The mansion, once a symbol of opportunity, had become a gilded cage. But Ethan was ready to break free. The next morning, the mansion felt heavier than ever, the walls seeming to press closer as Ethan paced the grand sitting room. His hands gripped the folder of evidence tightly, the weight of the truth he had uncovered pressing down on him. Every polished surface, every echo of his footsteps reminded him of the danger he faced, but also the power he now held. Margaret entered the room with her usual poise, her expression calm, as though she were unaware of the storm gathering around her. Good morning, Ethan. You look thoughtful. Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Margaret, we need to talk. Her eyebrow arched, curiosity flickering for the first time. Is that so? About what exactly? Ethan stepped forward, laying the folder of documents and photographs on the polished mahogany table. He could see her eyes dart to the papers, a subtle tightening of her jaw betraying her composure. I know everything, he said. The diary, the letters, the contracts, your plan, the manipulations, everything you've done to cover your tracks. Margaret's calm facade wavered for just a moment. You've been snooping, she said, her tone a dangerous whisper. Again, do you even understand what you're accusing me of? Ethan's hand shook, but his voice did not. I understand enough. You spent months, maybe years, orchestrating this marriage, manipulating my family, hiding the truth behind lies and carefully staged appearances. And now I have proof. For the first time, Margaret's expression hardened, the mask of politeness slipping to reveal the cold, calculating woman beneath. Do you think you can simply expose me without consequence? That you can undo the choices you made? Ethan's chest tightened, but he held his ground. No, I can't undo anything, but I can stop you from hurting anyone else. And I will. Margaret stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You think you're clever, Ethan. You think you can outmaneuver me. But you forget I've survived far craftier opponents than you. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and you'll regret it. Ethan swallowed, but his resolve didn't falter. I've already thought about the consequences. That's why I've gone to the authorities. You're not untouchable. Margaret's lips curled into a faint, dangerous smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. So this is how it ends? You call the police on the woman you married? On the person who gave you everything you ever needed? Ethan shook his head, his voice steady, carrying a quiet conviction. You gave me a life without asking, yes, but it came at the cost of my freedom, my trust, and my family's safety. What you've done is manipulation, fraud, and coercion. I can't let it continue. At that moment, the distant sound of car tires crunching on the gravel broke to the tension in the room. Ethan didn't need to look. He knew the police were arriving, and with them, the reckoning that Margaret had tried so hard to avoid. Uniformed officers entered, followed by Liam, who gave Ethan a reassuring nod. Margaret's expression flickered between shock and fury as she turned to face them, her composure finally cracking. Margaret Langley, an officer, began. You are under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and coercion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Margaret's gaze snapped to Ethan. For a moment, there was silence, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something almost like grudging respect. You called them, she said softly, the words trembling with a rare vulnerability. Ethan met her eyes, voice calm but firm. I couldn't let this continue. I had no choice. As the officers led her away, Margaret turned once more, her voice low but carrying the weight of a warning. You may have won this round, Ethan, but remember, revenge isn't easily forgotten. Be careful it doesn't consume you, too. Ethan watched her go, a strange mix of relief, sadness, and exhaustion washing over him. He had exposed the truth and freed himself, but Margaret's parting words lingered, a reminder of the shadows that ambition, manipulation, and vengeance can cast, even when justice prevails. For the first time in weeks, the mansion felt different. The air seemed lighter, the corridors less oppressive. Ethan knew there were still challenges ahead, but he also knew that he had taken control of his life, and that he had survived the most dangerous test of all, facing the person who had tried to manipulate everything he held dear. Ethan stood in the quiet of the grand sitting room, the folder of evidence clutched tightly in his hands. His pulse still raced from the confrontation, but there was no room for hesitation now. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, knowing that this was a moment he had been preparing for. The weight of the diary, the letters, the contracts, it all demanded action. He reached for his phone and dialed the detective he had been in contact with quietly over the past few days. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the line, but his voice remained firm. Detective Harper? It's Ethan Miller. I need to report a serious situation involving Margaret Langley. I have evidence of fraud, coercion, and manipulation. Everything is documented. On the other end, the The detective's voice was calm but alert. "Mr. Miller, take a deep breath and tell me exactly what's going on." Ethan explained step by step, laying out the entire story. How Margaret had orchestrated the marriage, manipulated his family, and maintained control through deception. He described the diary, the contracts, the letters, and the evidence of ongoing schemes. He spoke of his suspicions, the threats he had overheard from the staff, and the locked rooms that concealed her carefully guarded secrets. As he spoke, a strange mixture of relief and dread settled over him. Relief because he was finally taking action. Dread because he knew Margaret was dangerous, brilliant, and unpredictable. Still, he could no longer wait. Silence had been her ally, and now truth had to be his. Within minutes, the detective assured him that officers would arrive promptly. Ethan could hear the faint crunch of tires on the gravel outside, signaling the arrival of the police. He looked around the opulent room. Marble floors, gilded furniture, and high ceilings that had once felt so imposing now seemed to accentuate the gravity of what was about to unfold. Margaret returned from her morning walk through the estate, her expression calm, as if she were unaware of the storm descending upon her. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew there was no turning back. He stepped forward, keeping the evidence folder firmly in his grip. "Margaret," he said, voice steady, "I've done everything I can to be fair, but I can't allow this to continue. The authorities are here. They have the proof of your actions." Her eyes flicked toward the sound of approaching officers. For a brief moment, vulnerability passed over her features, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "You think you've won, Ethan?" she asked, her tone even but laced with a warning. "Do you truly believe this ends here?" Ethan met her gaze, unwavering. "It ends the way it has to. You made your choices, Margaret. Now it's time to face the consequences." Uniformed officers entered, moving with quiet precision. Ethan handed over the folder to Detective Harper, who nodded in acknowledgement. "Everything is here?" the detective asked. "Yes," Ethan replied, voice firm. "Everything. I want to ensure this ends, once and for all." The officers approached Margaret, reading her rights and informing her that she was under arrest. For the first time, the woman who had seemed untouchable, the one who had manipulated, controlled, and threatened with quiet precision, was confronted with the reality of her actions. As she was led away, Margaret's gaze found Ethan's. For a moment, there was no malice, no calculated cunning, just a faint, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the game she had lost. "Be careful, Ethan," she whispered as she passed. "Revenge leaves a shadow that never truly fades." Ethan watched her go, a complex swirl of emotions washing over him. Relief, sadness, anger, but beneath it all, a profound sense of resolution. He had faced a person who had tried to control his life, gathered the truth, and ensured that justice would be served. As the echo of the officer's footsteps faded into the mansion, Ethan finally allowed himself to exhale. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt a fragile sense of freedom. He knew the path ahead would require healing and reflection, but he had taken the first, and most important, step toward reclaiming his life. The mansion remained silent, its grandeur still imposing, but no longer oppressive. Ethan realized that while the walls held shadows of the past, they could no longer hold him. The truth was out, justice was on its way, and for the first time, he could truly breathe. The mansion was quieter than it had ever been, empty halls stretching out like silent witnesses to the months of tension and deceit. Ethan walked slowly through the rooms. The evidence folder now safely returned to Detective Harper, and the reality of what had happened finally began to settle in. He felt a strange mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a lingering weight. Relief that justice had been served, exhaustion from the constant vigilance he had maintained, and a weight that reminded him of the emotional scars left behind. He paused in the grand sitting room, sunlight filtering through the tall windows, casting patterns across the polished floors. Everything looked the same, the opulent furniture, the marble countertops, the chandeliers glinting softly. But Ethan knew nothing would ever feel the same. This house, once a gilded prison, now symbolized survival, clarity, and a chance to rebuild. He thought of Margaret, led away in handcuffs, her warning still echoing in his mind. Revenge leaves a shadow that never truly fades. And he understood now, her shadow might linger, but it didn't have to define him. He had a choice to reclaim his life, to step beyond the manipulation and the fear, and to create a future guided by truth and integrity. Ethan left the mansion for the last time, taking a slow walk through the estate's gardens. The crisp autumn air filled his lungs, a welcome contrast to the suffocating tension that had dominated the past weeks. Leaves crunched beneath his feet, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel hope. The weight of deceit and control had been lifted, replaced by the quiet power of clarity and choice. In the weeks that followed, Ethan focused on rebuilding the pieces of his life that had been overshadowed. He repaired relationships with his family, ensuring that they were safe, protected, and free from the financial and emotional manipulations that had dominated their past. He also took steps to help those affected by Margaret's schemes, sharing what he knew with authorities and legal aid networks to prevent others from falling prey to similar manipulations. Yet amidst the recovery and repair, Ethan also reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized the value of vigilance, the importance of questioning appearances, and the profound strength required to stand up against manipulation, even when fear and loyalty pull in opposite directions. He understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. One crisp morning, as he walked through a park near his apartment, Ethan found a small envelope waiting for him on a bench. The handwriting was elegant, unmistakable. He carefully opened it and found a note from Margaret, written during her time in custody. Her words were surprisingly reflective, almost human, stripped of the cold calculation he had known so well. Ethan, it read, I have had time to reflect. I see now that revenge has only prolonged my pain and shadowed my judgment. You have shown me that truth, courage, and integrity are far stronger than manipulation. I hope you continue to live your life guided by what is right, not what is convenient. Thank you for holding the line where I could not. Ethan folded the note, a faint smile touching his lips. He felt a quiet sense of closure, knowing that while Margaret had been a formidable force in his life, he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live with honesty and purpose. As he continued walking, the sun rose higher, illuminating the path ahead. Ethan knew the future would still hold challenges, but he also knew he had the tools, the resilience, and the moral compass to face them. The shadows of the past no longer controlled him. They had taught him, but they would not define him. He tucked Margaret's letter safely into his pocket, a reminder of both the dangers he had faced and the strength he had discovered within himself. And with that, he stepped forward, ready to embrace a life of clarity, justice, and hope, leaving behind the manipulations, the fear, and the shadows that had once held him captive. Ethan sat on a park bench, watching the late afternoon sun glint through the trees. The city around him moved at its usual pace. People hurrying to work, children laughing in the distance, the faint hum of traffic. But he felt a quiet stillness inside, a calm he hadn't known in months. The storm of manipulation, fear, and uncertainty that had dominated his life was finally behind him. He reached into his pocket and ran his fingers over Margaret's letter once more. The words were a reminder of the strength it takes to confront the truth, and the courage it takes to act when fear tempts you to stay silent. For Ethan, it was also a reminder that life is never entirely about control. Sometimes it's about resilience, about standing firm when the world seems determined to manipulate or deceive. In the weeks following Margaret's arrest, Ethan began rebuilding not just his life, but the lives of those around him. He worked to repair relationships with family and friends, offering support and stability to those who had been indirectly affected by the manipulation and deceit he had endured. The mansion, once a gilded prison, had been sold, and the proceeds allowed him to clear old debts, provide for his family, and even set up a small foundation to help others who might be caught in manipulative or fraudulent situations. But more than material security, Ethan had gained perspective. He realized that life is fragile, that trust can be both a gift and a weapon, and that integrity is the only shield strong enough to protect oneself against manipulation. He began mentoring younger colleagues, teaching them not only the law, but also the importance of ethics, discernment, and courage in the face of deceit. Ethan also reflected on Margaret, not with hatred, but with a complicated understanding. He had seen the depths of her anger and the pain she had carried for decades. While her choices had caused immense harm, they had also revealed universal truths about human vulnerability. The way grief can twist into obsession, the way past wounds can shape decisions, and the power of holding on to resentment. He understood now that forgiveness wasn't about excusing wrongs. It was about freeing oneself from their grip. Sitting there in the park, Ethan felt a sense of gratitude for the trials he had endured. The experience had taught him lessons no classroom could offer, lessons about courage, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit. He understood that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning from it and using that knowledge to build a better future. He watched a young couple laughing as they walked by, a reminder that life continues in all its beauty and unpredictability. Children ran past him, unburdened by the weight of past grievances or hidden schemes. And for the first time in months, Ethan smiled, not a tentative, uncertain smile, but a quiet, assured one. He had faced deception, danger, and moral complexity, and emerged with his integrity intact. Ethan stood, brushing leaves from his jacket, and took a deep breath. The road ahead was unknown, as it always is, but he felt ready. He carried with him the lessons of the past, the resolve to act with integrity, and the courage to face whatever challenges might come next. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Ethan walked forward, leaving the shadows of manipulation and fear behind. His story was a reminder that even in the darkest times, the choices we make define not only our future, but also the lives we touch. And in that choice, between fear and courage, deception and truth, resentment and forgiveness, he had finally discovered freedom. Ethan's story reminds us that courage, truth, and integrity can overcome even the darkest schemes. If this story touched your heart, give a like, share it with someone who needs inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV for more stories that move the soul.